On this episode of Geek Dad Life, we're going to review the new Masters of the Universe Origins Manny Faces figure by Mattel. Hello everybody and welcome to Geek Dad Life. It's your host Jay Glaffelter here. If you like these MOTU Origins videos and want to see me make more, hit that like button. And if you want to be notified when those episodes drop, click the subscribe button and that bell icon to make sure that you get notified when the latest episode of Geek Dad Life drops. People that pre-ordered the MOTU Origins Wave 2 figures from Walmart are starting to get them now. And while my Orko got shoved into a box that was too small to fit the whole card, my Manny Faces was put in a very lightweight bubble mailer, and it got a little beat up, not too bad. Again, I'm an opener, but just something to be aware of for the mint on card collectors. You're gonna wanna wait until you can find these in the wild or get it straight from a shipper case. Manny Faces, who has one of those great MOTU punny names that actually says exactly what its action feature is, features 3 different faces that was a core of the character since his first appearance in the mini-comic The Ordeal of Manny Faces. While the Filmation's cartoon and most other media after the mini-comics portrayed him as an actor that used the power of changing his appearance to improve his acting performances, the mini-comic went a darker route, with Skeletor being the one that actually changed him into the hideous monster, and after a battle between the goddess and Skeletor to turn him back to good or evil, the robot version was formed to be the neutral between the new evil monster side and the good human side. I've always found this to be a more compelling version of the character, and when I play with my 2 sons, this is the way that I'll represent Manny Faces.
This is the way.
Looking at the packaging, it is more of the same. We still have the new for 20 up in the left-hand corner, and since this is a US release of the card back, we have Heroic Human Robot Monster under his name. It also has a little blurb saying you turn his head for 3 different faces, and then we've got the burst saying Modern Posing Retro Play. On the back, we actually have artwork directly inspired from that mini comic, The Ordeal of Manny Faces, showing him acting for the royal court, and then Skeletor using the power sword to turn him into the evil monster. It is another example of fantastic artwork done by Axel and Francisco, and really, what's more to say than they are just doing amazing stuff for every single release for MOTU Origins. Manny Faces info boxes show how you can turn the top of his head to show the different versions of the character, the human, the robot, and the monster. And then we have cross-cell artwork showing the He-Man and Skeletor from Wave 1, as well as the Wave 2 figures Manny Faces, Orko, Trapjaw, and Scareglow. Taking the figure out of the box, I actually get to look at my first mini comic with text, the Double Trouble, which features all of the characters from Wave 2. It's a fun little story that kind of has a doppelganger, an evil doppelganger for Orko, and then hijinks ensue, and then they have to kind of restore order by getting the original Orko back. A fun little story, and I love that they're adding these with these figures. Looking at the figure himself, something that I really like, actually once I got him in hand and I didn't expect with this toy, is that the head actually has a cut swivel joint on top of the rotating faces. So that was a nice little surprise that honestly was an accident when I was trying to spin the top. It actually turns you actually kind of go all the way around in 360. So that is a really neat improvement versus the vintage figure where he just had this kind of big bulbous head that didn't move at all. For at least my vintage one, weighs him down as he's standing up now with his old rubber legs. So a really neat added articulation to this figure, putting his articulating points up to 17 versus the standard 16 of the other figures in the line. He comes with one accessory, his classic laser gun. It is smaller than the original one, which honestly was kind of comically large. So it's kind of one of the unique Origins accessories that is smaller than the original vintage counterpart. Now, the vintage Manny Faces also had a variant known as Manny Weapons that came with maroon-colored versions of the weapons rack weapons that was also sometimes paired with the Wonder Bread He-Man. It might have added too much cost to this figure, but that would have been a nice little Easter egg accessory pack thrown in, but maybe they'll do a variant on that down the line or include those weapons somewhere in the future. Looking at the sculpt of this figure, there's a lot of new sculpting, especially on the torso and head. And then we do have the arms and legs, which are also shared with Trapjaw, which look pretty good. Overall, I think the sculpting is good, but let's move on to the paint, where I do think it actually sells the sculpting a little bit short. If I had to critique one major area for this figure, it's in the paint applications. Now, it could be that this figure requires a lot more paint apps than a lot of the other figures in the line have had to use so far. I mean, you have 3 different faces that have a lot of paint applications, and then you have the kind of piping and the tubes and canisters on his body, and then you have the paint apps on his legs. So it required a lot more, but the paint applications on his arms, his waist, and his legs are severely lacking compared to the center and face of the figure. Now, again, these are a cheaper mass retail figure, so I don't want to knock it too bad. It's under 15 bucks, but if I had to pick on something here, I think it would be that the kind of the flesh color of the arms just looks really sloppy, and I had a little bit of paint slop on the legs too. So honestly, it makes the sculpting seem a lot softer than I think it is, because I do think the sculpting's pretty solid on this. But it is a little too soft, a little too, I don't want to say cheap looking, but it kind of feels that way for the arms and legs on this figure. It doesn't necessarily totally take me out of enjoying this figure. I still think it's great, but it is something to be aware of. Now, if you thought maybe the twisting helmet accessory would put him taller than the other figures in the line, he still sits a little under 6 inches, which kind of matches the height of a lot of the figures in the line so far. Going side by side with the vintage figure, there's a lot to love here if you're a vintage enthusiast. I think they got a lot of the proportions better on this modern figure, especially with the fact that the helmet actually can turn left to right. It's a lot more in proportion with the rest of the body than the vintage one, I feel. And, I think it kind of, your mileage may vary on whether you like the brighter colors of the Origins figures versus the more muted colors of the original line. Now, again, some of that could just be the age of this older Manny Faces here, but I really love how the MOTU Origins line's colors really pop. So kudos to the toy designers there, because I think it just makes them stand out that much more on your toy shelf. Now, if I did have to say one thing I like on the vintage better, I do like the actual face sculpts in the vintage figure. I think it looks better, but maybe that's the side effect of the Origins one having the actual swivel cut joint for the head sculpt. So I actually would prefer that versus what we got with the vintage. So I'm willing to enjoy that trade-off. So overall, I think this is another great addition to the Masters of the Universe Origins line. Putting the issues with the paint aside, I think the fact that, this one is a much more complicated figure to pull off, and they've done the essential things here. You have the, easy to rotate faces of the figure, and they added that articulating point for the head, which I think is a really, really cool addition. And while that may seem simple, it really does add so much more posability, playability, and displayability to this figure that we did not get on the vintage one. At under 15 bucks, this Manny Faces absolutely gets the Geek Dad Life buy rating. Definitely check out some of my other reviews for Masters of the Universe Origins. I got a playlist right here of every single one of them, as well as check out this video that YouTube wants you to see. And until next time, hasta luego and goodbye.